A round of applause, please, for Iain Patterson.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for joining me here after lunch. So it was the graveyard shift. So, yes, I'm actually coming through from GDS and have been in Wisconsin DVLA now for 2 years, basically to drive their digital agenda. I know with the topic here is around, if you like, driving that, if you like, digital innovation. So before I go into all of that, I'm going to give you a bit more of a background so you understand where we started from in DVLA and the journey we're actually on at the moment.
So DVLA is taking the lead on a lot of its own technology, a lot of its development, and the delivery of the exemplars, the 3 exemplars that we have for GDS and the public that we're delivering through 2014 and 2015. These are incredibly exciting projects, and we need more widely to really develop our own staff and also recruit from the local market here in Swansea to try and get really good technologists, people with great skills, and bring them into the organisation.
Okay, so what we have got is, yes, the clothes have changed, I think, it's fair to say, and some of the hair fashions, but predominantly we are still very much paper-based. And we have this bizarre aspect, we bring the paper in, about a third of the amount that comes across the bridge into Wales is for DVLA. And we process that, we scan that, so we can digitise it, and then we send paper back out. It's a huge paper factory. And actually the building was designed to be a process paper factory. So if you looked at the design, you'd see there were sort of dumb waiters that took the paper through the process. Somebody worked very hard to develop that into the architecture. And that goes back, way back into the 60s and 70s for that. But look at the numbers that we actually deal with. So, you know, they're huge. 6 billion of revenue is what we collect. And that was through the paper tax and now electronically. So it's huge amounts of savings that can be made. So it is very much a multi-channel aspect, but we're driving through to digital at this point. The next thing, when you look at the scale of what we actually do, I mean, this is obviously UK-based, but 3.1 billion of online transactions. And it's fair to say we're moving from 50% of online transactions to 80%, particularly in the tax disc area. There's been a lot of drive around that. So what we said we would do, and this is about 2 years ago, we decided to publish our strategy that we would become a digital organisation. There was a central government review of what organisations should be doing. DVLA was one of those, and did say that we had the capability, based in Swansea, to actually be excellent and go back to where we once were with our first, if you like, online service, which was the Tax Disc Online, and grow something around that and become a digital exemplar, not just for government, but also for the region. And it's fair to say we have a very important place in Swansea. We employ between 5,000 to 6,000 people. So we have some of those are casual staff. There's an awful lot of employees that we have. And actually, we also have people which have skills which are predominantly in the paper-based arena and not in the technical. So we had to look at how we were going to make some of that shift. So first thing which we did was start to look at the technology organisation we had first, so our IT function. And what we then started to look at was the business, and what business were we really in, and what should that look like? Once we've understood what we actually should be doing, instead of just carrying on doing the processes and things we're doing day after day, it gave us a very good feel with the sorts of skill sets that we needed, the sorts of people that we had in those skills, and the sorts of people that could be reskilled, and those that perhaps wouldn't, and therefore would they come to the end of their working life at the same time as some of our legacy processes. So how would that actually work? And to try that together. So we changed the way we actually worked and decided to divide ourselves into services. There are some 67 services we provide across the organisation. And when we started to structure against those, rather than the siloed usual directorships of IT, HR, etc. So we took a very linear approach that said, look across that, and what do we need to have those services supported by? Do we have projects in the same way where they continually go on, or do we actually just do big bang projects, or do we have slow iteration, etc. on those? So we took a very different look at our business than we had done previously. What we have now is a business that's still developing in that way, but is much more aligned to those services and the capabilities required to actually get those services delivered and maintained. So that was sort of setting ourselves up ready for transformation. All right. The next piece was look at the actual supply chain and how that was built. That was built in the good old-fashioned way of getting a large outsourced contract together, and then that outsourced contract would start to look at its tier 2, tier 3 players that would support that. So you go into the usual bidding war, one big super player wins, and it's all your risk is bundled up into one contract, and therefore lots of people are quite comfortable with that risk sort of approach. You talk to people in central government, say 5, 6 years ago, they very much recommended this sort of approach to procuring IT. IT is not our core business. That is something we maintain it. Let's get one of the big players that understand it better. Some civil servants watch that happen and monitor it, and then basically the contract will go on. What invariably happens in that situation is you fall out of love with your suppliers quite quickly. You end up with little wars going on. The contract probably wasn't robust in the way you thought it was in the first place. And you pay lots more money, and you get upset with each other through a process. They always start off well, end up poor. We recognise we need to change the way we actually looked at our landscape. So we looked at the larger players. There is room for those. We also looked at what role we had to play, growing our capability, becoming far more intelligent around how we manage and what we want to do, and also the room for the SME market. So we understood we want to get more of those players involved and get them to be part of that mix. The issue with that always is that the mix you have is always outweighed by the risk you have in the original contract. So we had to go back and renegotiate the contract and structure it so it would allow us to play a bigger role and for our SME community as well. So let's just continue on that piece for a moment. A lot of the contracts didn't fit into what we looked at as being the agile way of working. They didn't fit to the design principles we now had, and they weren't aligned to the services. So in that renegotiation, we had to go right back to the brass tacks of it and start looking at how we wanted to work, because the contract was designed in a way that wasn't the way we want to work in the future. Now, some of you may be aware, our contract, actually the legacy contract, comes to an end in September 15, September this year, whereby we've actually progressed quite aggressively our exit plans. We've got a lot more SMEs involved, and we're starting to reskill our people so we can take it in-house. And we will end up duping the people that were once in the large contract space in as being DVLA staff. So we're actually insourcing our IT and technology so we can actually progress our digital transformation. The other thing which is really important was looking at what we called our change pipeline. So when any government is in place, and now we have a new government, they have lots of great ideas. Those ideas come down to us to deliver them and put them in place, so policy changes, etc., all require technology and digital change. So we had to take a good look at that and understand what were we committed to, what is it that had to be built in the old way, because we just didn't have time, and we haven't actually got rid of all our legacy technologies. And then we started to look at the new items we could build in a digital way. So there are many things that we started to build. The exemplar program, which was driven through from the Cabinet Office and GDS, meant that we had 3 exemplars, and Oliver talked to that on the video. We've delivered all of those, which is your view drive record, disposal of trade, and personal registration. Those were some of the items which were highlighted by industry, by the motoring sector, because they said they wanted these things because they reduced the amount of red tape and burden on them, and therefore they were seen to be a burden on industry, and we could reduce that by delivering these items. So we had to make sure that we still had the skills in-house and through our external providers to actually build those, map that against the capabilities as well. We also had to understand more about what our customers were doing. The one thing, before I go into the sort of the how and what we did around driving innovation, the one thing we have to acknowledge is that people behave in ways that we don't necessarily expect them to behave when something occurs. So it's fair to say when we put direct debit through, and direct debit was landed October 1st, the same as the getting rid of the paper tax disc, people started to do things which we hadn't picked up before in their behaviours. And to any of you who are going through any of these digital change organisations, you will find no doubt the same things happening. So people naturally find ways to get round paying things like a vehicle tax. And they go to some ingenious ways of doing it. So we had people setting up a direct debit, then getting rid of the direct debit, cancelling it within 2 weeks, setting up another one, doing the same thing over and over again, which meant they never appeared on our registers for people that weren't paying tax. We also found that people would still see a tax disc on a car and believe that car still to be taxed. It doesn't matter how many messages we put out, that tax disc has been there for 90 odd years. So people got accustomed to it. And we were still seeing things in Auto Trader, although we'd spoken to them, where they'd taken out the items about taxed and MOT'd. They had MOT'd, not taxed, but people put in the free text. So people behave in different ways. So we started to invest a lot more in building user experience labs and actually starting to get really into the guts of what, if you actually ask someone, how would you get around this, what would you do, and getting a bit more of a truthful view. In other words, don't just talk to civil servants about how this thing would work, but talk to real users. So we had to understand how we have to change in our business to understand our users and our user behaviour, because it fundamentally changes some of the things that we actually build and how we think things will work. That also meant we had to change the mindset of people within our organisation to accept that people wouldn't robotically follow rules. People, as we call it, would follow the edge cases as much as possible. They would circumnavigate some things we wanted to do or make life easier for them. So there was a strong focus on what we needed as customer insight. And, it's the only way we can actually be sure of delivering robust digital services. So if I get to the crux of what we needed to do, most of this, however we want to look at the technology, is centred around people. People around the behaviours I just mentioned, and people within the organisation. The greatest resistance to transformation is the organisation itself that's been doing the same thing for many, many years. It is hard because it's challenging to people's jobs. It's challenging people who have gone through years and years of getting certain positions where those positions don't perhaps have the same clout, and does change the way that we see ourselves culturally as an organisation. So culture was our biggest risk and still is a major challenge to what we're trying to achieve. But we had to change the way people think. We did that in various different ways. We ran different types of activities to expose that digital isn't purely about technology. It's about the way you think, and involves many people with different skills around analytics, data, insight, etc., and design. So it comes from all the design all the way through to fulfillment in the technology space. Yeah, of course, we have to look at the different types of tooling and technologies we use, and we're being quite smart about that. Yes, we have principles about open standards, so we can actually start to connect up to other government departments and to other businesses. But predominantly, this is about creating a digital community in an area that didn't really seem to have one at the time, and using the monies that we had within DVLA to spend on technology and design and start to look at smarter ways of deploying that. So what we started to do is start to look at, for example, the universities. Universities ran some fantastic technology degree courses and had some expertise in there as well. And they've been working in other areas, from research through to analytics, etc. So we started to form relationships with that university, Swansea University in particular. Two things. We wanted their skills to help us design a digital future within DVLA. And then the other aspect, the return of that, was we wanted to put our people back through those doors of the university, not just to do full degrees, but do some full form of qualified training that was recognised in government. So we can pick people out, having understood the capabilities already in those people that could be trained, how many of those people could go back into some form of training and move away from a paper-based career and move into something far more exciting and digitally focused. And I'm pleased to say that we start, the first 20 of those will go through, actually being selected as we speak. So we start going through the next couple of weeks. And we'll start to see that year on year, we've made major investment for training that takes them through that. We've also reached out to things which are schools. So Code Club for younger children, moving all the way up to senior schools. So we've got far more involvement in creating a whole technology vibe around something which is DVLA. And we've tried to turn DVLA from being this grey government thing into a living digital experience for people. We also started to put on things like hackathons. So to some people, it's quite interesting. Hackathon is for technical people. And the answer was no, it's for people with problems to solve, to use smart people around them, some of which are technical, to resolve them. And what was supposed to be a very low-key event, one off the block to start off, see how it went, became very popular. And the word spread out there quite quickly, and it was a huge event that we ended up running, which meant lots of sugary foods and drinks to keep people awake through the night and get them focused on things and keep them energized. But it's fair to say we had some people that were negative around the digital journey that actually got involved and quite enjoyed it and found that they can actually look at design and start designing things, although they had no real technology background. So that changed the way that people thought, or started to. As I say, it is a journey, not a destination. We have to keep pushing that aspect of it through. The other thing we started to look at was Tech Hub. So I guess most of you are familiar with Tech Hub. Just show of hands quickly. Great, I'm glad that's the right answer. Nobody did one hand go up. So Tech Hub was very important for us. Two things. One, we expect that we will be working with SMEs that are generated through Tech Hub. Secondly, that actually we found that talking to most people that are qualified with their degrees in Swansea or working in technology in Swansea wanted to stay there. The old adage used to be, if you wanted to get a good job in Swansea, go work for someone like IBM, because they'll push you back into Swansea once you've been to London. And that's what we found. We had a lot of homegrown talent. And what we started to do then was map items with Tech Hub. For example, look at some floor space. We're now launching our new digital services platform that's long overdue. That is being built now within the Tech Hub premises. So we are mixing our people with those of the SME markets, with the entrepreneurs that are working within Tech Hub as well. So we're sponsoring events down there and encouraging the fact that companies that get into the Tech Hub and work there are people that we can actually work with, and we'll encourage them to get into the digital marketplace, which is the government procurement engine, to get them to actually apply so we can actually pick them off and get them moving and get some real business moving in their direction. So you start to see a local ecosystem starting to form. Going back to children at schools and understanding about coding and coding being fun, all the way to people in their senior schools, encouraging them that there's a digital opportunity. And at the end of that, although it's a government organisation, it is actually an exciting place to work in that digital space as it evolves. And therefore you can go to university, qualify and have a job at the end of it. And if you don't have that full circle, then actually what happens is people just peel off or feel, what is the point? Because I can't get a job at the end of it, and I can't get a job near where I want to be. So this scheme, although it's trialled in DVLA, is something which other government departments are starting to look at, and some of them start to form with digital academies, etc. And the idea is that we can actually get proper qualifications for people so they can actually work in other government areas and start to develop. Perhaps if they want to work in another government area, they could. And therefore, there's also a career path for them too. They're not just have to stay in DVLA. So The insight piece of things, I mean, that's quite interesting with the UX lab that we built. I said I was at one of the panels earlier on, that we've built now the largest user experience lab, which is south of Bristol. And that will be used to work with all the aspects of businesses, individuals to start working there. We're also looking to share that and open it up. We will be sharing that with the universities, and we're also linking it to other user experience labs up and down the country. Because obviously not everybody who is involved with us is looking for the experience of just Swansea. You know, we have to work on a national basis. Run out of clicks, I think. Sorry, folks at the back, it's, let's turn that piece. So, I think the goal for us isn't that we are just digital transformation. It's about a better service and a better government overall. Sometimes I have to put on my government digital services hat and look at this and interact with the other areas of government and what they're trying to achieve, and actually make sure that we're following the right pace, but also that we're supporting the fact that we are providing digital services for customers today. A lot of things which we are doing in Swansea are ahead of the curve with things that are happening in other areas of government. Primarily because we believe we've got the capabilities and we've started early and we've got the right kind of setup to make that work. So, what I'd say with the story so far is quite simple. We've got an increase of our digital tax by 16%. So a few facts. A driving licence digital take-up has increased by 16%. There are 25 million more digital transactions in 2014 compared to 2013. We have moved from 50 to 80% of digital take-up in 1 year. We built beta services to let fleet companies view information about their vehicles in their fleet. We built new beta services to let motor traders tell us they bought or sold a vehicle. Something which used to take weeks takes 5 minutes through a digital transaction, and we avoid the paperwork. We've built a new personalised registration service to make it simple for people to move services from one vehicle, move the number plate, for example, from one to another. That can be done at the same time you're getting rid of a vehicle as well, so those two things are joined up. Now that might seem quite small and insignificant, but it's a huge amount of saving. I think it proves the point that if you create the right culture and the right drive and the right environment, and bring in the local community to help you do it, you can make fundamental changes in a business that's been pretty well paper-based for 40 years into something that's far more fast-moving and digitally orientated. We've also built basically the new version of the vehicle tax and SAWN services. So people pay by direct debit, as I said before. We're going through different iterations of that. We've very much applied the agile approach, which means we get things out there based on the user need and the research we get. And as I said before about the key people behaviour and how that works, we start to tweak that and hone that back into our services. So we have a continual feedback loop with the services we provide to make sure that we can actually start to drive the right sorts of change. It is fair to say that we still live on a vastly legacy type technology that sits in the background. That legacy technology quite often fails us when we most need it. The digital service platform talked about in line with some of these new digital services will start to take us away from that. And it allows us to start to change the whole landscape, if you like, the back engine of what is DVLA in order to support our new organisation and how we want it to work. So it's probably a canter quite through there. I think the lessons that I would want you to take away from that are you have to live within some of your existing constraints if you're not a greenfield organisation. You have to look at the contracts and the constraints you have within your commercial landscape to make sure you can make the sorts of changes you want to do. You drive innovation not by buying it from third parties, but by driving the culture inside the organisation to work in the way you want and to allowing people to fail and fail quickly, but not get bruised from it, but to learn and pick that up. So the agile way of working works very well for that. And it's tough to do that. And it's tough when you start to take bits of paper away from people and Gantt charts to work in a very agile way. It's alien to them. So you have to provide the right sort of landscape and environment for that and the right levels of training for it. The advantage we have, and I think most government departments have if they look outside of their boundaries, is actually we're not always the best at doing it. There are universities or other organisations around education that are very good at doing this and started and studying it and have, if you like, much more of a foresight of what it can do. And therefore, working with the universities and people like Tech Hub helps us to accelerate what we need to do with our people in order to do that. That fosters innovation itself. Mixing those environments and putting the universities and the Tech Hub in with your organisation also means that we've got some new ideas coming through, and people can see things which people haven't been able to see for several years because they're too close to it. So you have to drive the culture of innovation within your organisation. And I would say the other thing is it has to be top down. You have to look at your executive team, what your executive team are doing, and lead by example. It's all right as the CTO to start looking at digitising an organisation, but unless you've got the operations people and the HR people looking at the training and skills needed, then you're not going to be effective. If you haven't got a CEO that supports that agenda and sees the benefits of it, it's never going to happen. So those are the kind of messages I would want to leave you with as far as what you need to foster and create innovation in that digital age. And I would also say is you're not going to get it right first time, every time as well. It's a slow process. You can think you're going fast, but the culture, whilst you get an impetus to start with, the culture will always try to slow you down. You have to keep working on it and convince people 1, 5, 10 at a time that it's a better way to work and give them the evidence to see it can work in that way. So I'm going to open up for any questions. Any at all? Sorry, at the back there. So there's a microphone anywhere? Barely, but I don't know if anyone else can.
Thanks very much. It was a very interesting presentation. My name is Nick Reeks from Tata Steel, so we have a lot of legacy systems in South Wales as well. Slightly different tangent. As a government organisation with respect to digital inclusion for everybody, given the rates that you're targeting, how do you deal with that?
I think it's an interesting one with digital inclusion because there's always this Pareto rule of, 80% of people buy 2020 kind of approach to it. And it's not strictly true. I think what we have to do is understand that we are still a multi-channel organisation. People will come through to digital because it's easier and convenient, not because we're forcing them. And I think we have to acknowledge that. We still will have paper channels and telephone. We are moving to things like web chat, for example, so if people get caught and not knowing how to react from the site, they can communicate with us through the site and actually understand and complete that journey. We also look to other organisations to help us, so we work closely with the Post Office, for example, about, if you like, how we actually can help people take things up digitally. If I look to something like direct debit, it doesn't appear a natural thing to be digital, but once you've done it and you're inside that journey, you just repeat the process over and over. So we have to be aware of the impact we have against the pace that we're able to move as well. And not all things do suit digital. But primarily, the items that we do and the service we do can be honed down to make them more acceptable. Why? Because actually, if somebody's filling out a form in front of them, it's no different, and it should be easier to fill out the form on the screen. Most of our work is filling in forms and compliance with those forms. And therefore, if you sent a form off that was incorrect, you'd wait 3 or 4 weeks, then get something back saying some data was missing. And then you go through the process again. Whereas when it's online, we can manage that exception straight away and flag it to someone, telling them they haven't given us sufficient data. So we find that the services we provide in that way are far more efficient. People are happy with them because they're faster, but there will always be people that are unhappy with them, and we will always find that there are people that aren't able to uptake those digital services. But we have to complement them, and we have to make sure we can take them through those journeys, and we have to provide alternative channels. There's no alternative to it. I think we'll always be multi-channel organisation for many years to come, in fact. Any other questions?
I've got 2 questions, if that's okay, that I really want to ask you, particularly for people who weren't at the panel discussion where you were at earlier on. You talked in your talk about a local ecosystem. I just want to ask you whether, as an organisation, you're getting the new entrants with the skills from schools and universities that you would like to see.
It's fascinating, because one of the things that, one of the first challenges I faced was actually back in London, and I was asked how we would actually get people to come and work for us. And they actually got the name of the city wrong and called it Cardiff, which wasn't really impressive to me.
Big mistake to make.
It could be, yeah. And so for me, yes, we are. We recently ran some adverts for developers, and we were overwhelmed with applicants, and good quality ones. I would say, to be honest, salary is always the problem. You know, when you look at government salaries, they're not great, but we've been given permission for an uplift on that because we recognise you have to be at least at market rate to do so. And I think money isn't the only thing that attracts people, it's also the technologies you use. Quite honestly, if I'm going to ask people to come on board and work with us on some really old technology, and they've just come out of university, they're not going to want to come and work with us. They want to work on newer technology. So working on those newer technologies, giving them the opportunity to grow in that space, and knowing they will leave, I think is also the right approach. We know that developers will leave after about 2 years unless they can get a career path. We know that they will do that. We know what the time frames are for most careers and so forth. So yes, we're getting the throughput. We're starting to see that now. We've got, I think, 17 new developers coming on board, and I think we had something in the region of 75 applications.
And one of the things that came out of this morning's session were lots of organisations in coffee talking about that silo mentality, that lots of organisations here saying, well, you know, we're not happy with what's being taught in schools or universities. And then you say, well, so do you ever go into schools? Do you ever have a relationship with universities? And what's the answer at the DVLA? Do you have a relationship with universities? Do you have a relationship with schools? Or do you just stay away?
No, we're actually very much involved with the universities. We meet with them on a regular basis. We go in, we look and see what they're doing. We're aware of the new computer block that's being built down in Fabian Way in Swansea as well. We're very interested in that because perhaps, for example, our labs, etc., could reside there, so they could be shared by all rather than put onto our premises. Yes, we like to share them, but it's easier in the campus. And also, what do we get in return? We get far better research, some people that find things from very smart people we actually haven't employed yet that can start to look into it and see how it works. I believe you cannot create that ecosystem unless you are directly involved with the schools or with the universities. So we're very involved.
Fascinating. Any more questions? Ladies and gentlemen, a huge round of applause. Thank you very much indeed for your attention.